Welcome back to Endurance Icons, where we sit down with individuals who are excelling and inspiring in the world of endurance sports. We're your hosts, Jessica and Mark Cullen. Today, we have brought on Bob Miller, who we believe is an endurance icon. Why? Well, he's competed in over 30 international expedition races. He's designed or directed over 35 adventure races or multi-sport courses. He also is the event organizer of a race called Wilderness Traverse, and his team came second at Eco Challenge Fiji, which is a show that you can watch on Amazon Prime. Welcome, Bob.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, we're super excited to have you on the show. The first question that we're going to ask, because there's going to be a lot of people who've never even heard of adventure racing. What is it?
Yeah, so it's kind of the ultimate team sport that kind of, I guess, endurance team sport that pits kind of like athletes against nature. Yeah, you're basically a team of, 3 or 4 friends going out for up to 10 days on a wilderness race course nonstop. And you're trying to, survive in these crazy wilderness environments where the event directors will send you. And yeah, it's just awesome. I mean, you go through so many emotions in the sport. The highs and lows are off the charts. But yeah, at its essence, it's team-based. So 3 or 4 teammates, you're mountain biking, trail running, orienteering. Usually there's paddling disciplines, could be whitewater, basically anything non-motorized goes. And yeah, you have, a time limit. Now there are entry-level races up to like 3 to maybe 6 hours, which still sounds like a long race, but those are kind of like the entry-level ones. And then right up to the long, what are called expedition races, which could last anywhere from 3 to 10 days. So yeah.
So how did you get started in something like this?
So the show that came out, Eco Challenge on Amazon Prime a couple of years ago, that show existed and it was quite popular back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And a lot of us started back then. There was actually a very prolific race scene back then. There were like 3 or 4 race series in Ontario that were happening at the time. So I was like kind of everyone else. I saw the show back then, and then I kind of started looking around for like events to participate in. And luckily there were some, great events happening at that time. But prior to that, it was kind of funny timing. I was kind of just coming out of university, and a friend and I thought it would be fun to try a marathon. I wasn't into endurance sports back then, so we kind of were like, let's try this just on a whim. And we ran a few marathons, and then I kind of got hooked on endurance sports then. So it would have been like my early 20s. Then I started with some triathlons. But growing up, I participated in a lot of team sports, so like hockey, baseball, soccer, that kind of stuff. So once I saw adventure racing, I was like, this is perfect. It's team, it's in the endurance sport I was just getting into, and also the outdoors. I took outdoor ed in high school, had a great outdoor ed teacher, and that got me introduced to canoe tripping and things like that. So this was just combining all of that, the competition, the teamwork, the outdoors, into this amazing event. And yeah, after the first race, I was hooked. And then it just kind of snowballed from there.
So what would you say is one of your first event memories of one of your first races that you did?
Yeah, I know about my first race. I still remember it quite well. It was funny. I was helping at the Storm Adventure race this fall in Halliburton Forest. And that's actually where I participated in my very first adventure race back in, it would have been like 98 or 99, with some of my high school friends and university friends. So Chris Ordanis and Leanne Mueller were on our team. And funny enough, we actually won our very first race.
Of course you did.
Total fluke. Well, I was like everyone else back then. I was reading like how to use a map and compass the night before the race and trying to figure it out. But we did get beat, but the team ahead of us lost their passport. It was like all punch passports back then, and they got penalized, but they were miles ahead. There was a really kind of experienced team. I think they might have even had some Eco Challenge participants on the team, but Yeah, I mean everyone was making wrong turns back then, going all over the place. So it was a
I
blast.
wanted to hop a little bit into that Eco Challenge Amazon Prime special because we just watched it a couple weeks ago and it was just like what an incredible but looked like such a grueling race. So I wanted to ask you a couple questions on that one. First of all, obviously the team element is so important in adventure racing. So you had kind of a bit of a unique team with two pro OCR racers and then looked like a past teammate, Scott, as well. How did you go about selecting your team for that? And how did you know they were the right people that were going to be able to handle a massive event like that?
Yeah, it was an interesting process. So when they announced the event, Scott and I hadn't been expedition racing for years. I don't think Scott had done a race in about 8 years, and I had been like 6 years out of, seriously participating in those events. So he and I kind of saw it was announced, and we were like, we wanted to try and get a team together for this. And Ryan and I, Atkins, used to work together, is how we really got to know each other on some obstacle course racing races called Mud Hero. It was a big series in Canada for a while, and friends of ours started it, and we were kind of helping them run those events. So we got to know each other quite well, and this was before and then right around the time he started doing really well in obstacle course racing. But Ryan's a unique guy. I mean, he's into everything and, outdoors based. So we always thought it would be fun to team up for an event. So luckily I was able to convince him to join us. I mean, like you said, he's a professional athlete and he had to fit it in between his, big races for obstacle course racing. And he still went and raced, like, I think it was the Spartan North American champs or something, like 2 weeks after the Eco Challenge race, and still came like second. Like literally a day or two after we finished, he was out like spinning out his legs and just loosening up, and we were just like, you got to be kidding me. This guy's
Yeah,
nuts.
he's a beast. Totally. He's a good follow on Strava there. You're like, wow, he's doing some amazing stuff.
Yeah, so that's how we got Ryan. And then the female was tricky. We were kind of searching. We had tried training with one girl and it didn't work out. And then Ryan had suggested Rhea from obstacle course racing, and we did a training weekend with her. And yeah, she was kind of raw in the sense that she didn't have a lot of experience with the sports. Like she just started mountain biking that year, surprisingly. But you could tell she had kind of the grit and determination and mindset. She just wanted to learn everything, soak it up, and she was kind of up for anything. So we kind of took a big risk having her on the team. And honestly, we kind of struck lightning in the race. I mean, I've been doing these races for a long time, and I know getting a result like that isn't easy to come by. And yeah, it was pretty cool to experience that new team and still to be that successful. But one thing, so Ryan's like the ultimate pro as far as I'm concerned when it comes to endurance sports, and he actually set up a conference call with his sports psychologist in the days leading up to the race. And it really helped align our team before the event, getting our goals. We kind of shared what we thought our weaknesses were, and we talked about strengths. And it kind of really set us up to be prepared mentally. And as you can imagine, when you're racing for so many days, the mental side is definitely the most important.
Bob, so what does training look like for a multi-day event like this? Like obviously two of your teammates were coming from OCR, so they're probably doing more OCR specific racing, and that clearly applied very well to this race. But like yourself and Scott, who are more pure adventure racers, what would kind of training look like for you guys?
Yeah, lots of volume. But I mean, I kind of was a self-taught as far as endurance training and just read lots of books and whatnot. But basically, we're following that kind of classic pyramid model with like just building a giant base and then starting to kind of tweak it for more, high intensity stuff. But the unique stuff with adventure racing comes with like your technical skills. It's kind of where it diverges from like a triathlon training program. We would swap paddling in for swimming with doing all the, the biking and the running. But then, yeah, we're trying to obtain all these other skills. So, whether it's whitewater paddling or like on foot, we'll do a ton of like technical running, like very technical running, where we might just run up like a dry riverbed, like something that's very rocky, or like go to a shoreline and kind of scramble across the rocks to kind of build your kind of awareness of how to move across that terrain quickly. And that actually paid off huge in Eco Challenge, because we had a couple sections up and down riverbeds, and the super slippery section where those cold pools were was like crazy. So stuff like that. And then obviously the orienteering side is super important, learning to navigate. So teams that haven't had that training or that background. So I'm kind of lucky that I organize events and I get some practice in for orienteering in that regard. So there's kind of all those additional skill sets that you bring to an endurance kind of base. But yeah, like a typical week might be anywhere from like 15 to like 30 hours, depending on what we're doing. And yeah, for me, I was trying to get, 3 bikes in, 3 runs in, and 2 or 3 paddling sessions in, as far as like the core endurance stuff. But then, adding in the other skill sessions. Also, ropes is a part of it. So where you're learning to ascend, the rappelling's pretty easy, but you still need to learn the skills so you can do it efficiently in the race. It's crazy. There's just like so many unique skills I've learned through the sport, which is kind of what brings a lot of us back.
And when you're moving for so many days in a row like that, I think nutrition would obviously play a huge part in that too. Did you have like a very dialed like nutrition strategy for the day, or is it more just like constantly be eating because you're probably behind on calories for many days at a time?
Yeah, definitely the goal is just tons of calories, and you're not as concerned with the quality when you're racing for that many days. Now, that being said, we were taking multivitamins, and kind of one of the unique things, it's maybe not that unique, that I've always done to make sure I get enough calories, are these like weight gain drinks that we'll have a couple times a day to get like tons of amino acids, tons of calories. And usually we'll drink those if we're going to go down for a sleep or anything like that. So we'll have a big calorie boost to try and beef those up. We're trying to consume 10,000 calories anyways in a 24-hour period. And that's actually a big part of it, having a stomach that can manage that. But other sports that are going for long durations understand that as well. But the calories are probably more liquid and more gel based. And we'll eat those too, but there's a lot of junk food that we eat too. Candy bars, chips, pretzels, like all sorts of random things. Baby food's a funny one that people find amusing because it's easy on your stomach. If you have a funky stomach, we'll eat like powdered baby food and things like that. So all sorts of bizarre things.
Another big aspect I know of adventure racing is you run into like sleep deprivation issues. So was that a big aspect of this Eco Challenge race? And how did you guys kind of manage that? I know there was it looked like some forced kind of sleep sections there as well, but did you have some like really tough moments in the race where you guys battled that?
Yeah, they didn't cover this for our team in the show, but the last night was horrific for our team from a sleep deprivation standpoint. Had we managed our sleep better, or if we were able to take more sleep, kind of what would have been the 5th night of the race, it would have set us up to finish a lot stronger. We had a paddle, the last paddle, when apparently we got close to the New Zealand team. We didn't even know that they had those issues with their outrigger canoe. And, we were kind of just trying to survive and stay ahead of the 3rd place team. But we had made some errors on the 5th night, some navigation errors. We couldn't find a trail that kind of led over this ridge, and we got bashing around in the bush for like 4 hours. We lost, just messing around. And some of that time we would have spent sleeping on that was the 5th night of the race. So we basically just hunkered down for like a half-hour nap once we got back on trail and kind of figured out where we were going. And then we got up that morning. It was probably the 5th morning of the race. And and we kind of just started hauling because we thought we'd lost a bunch of placements. And that got us into the last camp, where we were surprised to find we were still in second place, which was awesome. And then you're right, we had to stay at each camp for, I think, an hour and a half. So we were kind of spent our hour and a half there and left, and the other team hadn't come in yet. But we also knew at that point we'd lost because we'd seen the New Zealand team earlier that night. And then by the time we got there, I think we were like 4 hours behind. So anyways, we got out onto what was the last section of the race. That's when we got our maps, and we kind of realized there was about 18 hours left. And we knew we weren't going to be able to sleep that last night because the finish line was there. So we were kind of have to like push through. So when we started that last outrigger canoe leg, it was probably 10 o'clock at night. And we were just dying to stay awake. We were trying everything. We had like coffee drinks and caffeine pills and singing songs and doing trivia. But I think I must have fallen asleep hundreds of times paddling and almost falling into the water. And then you kind of shock yourself awake. It's like the worst feeling in racing because you're stressed trying to get the race done, and teams are around you, but you just can't hold it together because you're so tired. But yeah, so that paddle normally might have taken us only like 6 hours, but because of the sleep deprivation, we were like 9 hours to do that paddle, which was just brutal for us to get through that. But yeah, as far as the race as a whole goes, yeah, they had those mandatory stops. I think they might have been 3 hours. I can't remember. It was 90 minutes or 3 hours, but no, sorry. You actually had to take 4 blocks of 3 hours. This is in addition to the stops at the camps. But over a 6-day race, you're going to take that amount of sleep anyways. Usually the way the races work with sleep strategy is teams will push through the first night without sleep. And then they'll start taking anywhere from 2 to 4 hours of sleep for the remainder of the race. But that will only get you to like maybe 5 days. And then I find once you tip over 5 days, if you haven't banked more sleep earlier on, you're really going to pay. And that's kind of what happened to us in this race. But we did actually bank a lot of sleep early because they had some dark zones with the issue with the canyon flooding and teams getting stuck there. And then we actually hit the start of the whitewater rafting leg early, where it was a dark zone where they don't let you do certain disciplines in the dark. So they'll implement something called the dark zone. So we hit that at like midnight or 1 a.m. So we got a big chunk of sleep. So on like the second and third nights, we had, more sleep than we normally would take. And then we were just kind of like piecing it together for the rest of the race. But yeah, that's kind of how the sleep deprivation goes. It sounds kind of crazy and not a lot of sleep, especially when you're moving for that amount of time. But yeah, when you're in the race and kind of the competition is there and you're performing the activities, it kind of helps keep you awake in going through it. But I'll still remember the first few times we tried doing this in training, and it's not a fun feeling until you get used to it. And we definitely don't train for sleep deprivation anymore. I would say if a team is new to it, they should try it before an event if they're going to be going through the night. But yeah, no, getting sleep is super important in your training, as you guys know.
I was going to ask if you did any training or if you've done any training for this sleep deprivation. I know that you balance, 2 young boys, a family. How do you balance all of the training that you do, plus, the sleep deprivation, preparing for a race, juggling, being a race director? Do you have any secrets to that?
I don't anymore. I actually have. So we had Hank when I was training for this event, our oldest son. And then, yeah, it was very challenging trying to juggle everything. And I was actually incredibly stressed from a work-life balance standpoint and trying to get prepared for this event. This was 2019 when the event actually took place, and it took place right after my busy event organizing season. So I was like maxed out at that point, and I was like, never again am I going to try and do that. But yeah, it's kind of been unfortunate that the pandemic hit and all the races stopped right when the show came out. Our team has talked about getting together to try and race again, but scheduling is a challenge for me now that we have two sons, and I know what it would take to put in the training. So I actually haven't raced since, like, at a serious level since that event, and I can see it happening again maybe in the next couple years as our boys get a bit older. But my hats are off to all the mums and dads that find the time to do this much training and manage the kids and do everything. It's really hard.
Yeah, especially with upwards to 30 hours a week, and it's very technical. And if you're running up riverbeds, you need to be finding those, driving to where it's specifically found. It's just a lot of logistics. One question that I had, you talked a little about talking to a sports psychologist. I would say that there's an incredible element, and what I love about adventure racing that's so different than a lot of endurance sports is that it's so focused on the team. But I'd love to hear a little bit more. It doesn't need to be this race, but how you have worked through the psychology of team in racing, and maybe some highs and some lows that you've experienced throughout your career when it comes to sort of the team psychology within these races.
Yeah, I mean, it's like one of the most important aspects of the sport is finding teammates and people you want to spend time in stressful situations with. And sometimes you don't know until you're in the race environment if the team's going to work. So, I mean, there are definitely some things we can do ahead of time. I talked about talking to the sports psychologist earlier before the Eco Challenge event. But really, this starts well ahead of that, and getting a feel for each other's kind of personalities and how you're going to react. But a big saying kind of in the sport is that there's no ego. This is really hard for a lot of people, is to let go of their ego. Especially in a race, if you're the one that's suffering and maybe holding the team back, it's hard to speak up and ask for help. We struggle with that. Everyone struggles with that in their daily lives. You know, when you need help, you got to ask for it. And it really comes through in this setting. So having no ego, and I mean, from an endurance racing standpoint, you can probably understand if you're starting to suffer and you don't say anything, and then you let it go further and further, you're just kind of digging yourself further into a hole, and it's going to take longer to get yourself back kind of to a level that you can kind of contribute to the team again. So we kind of have some rules around that on our teams, where basically if someone offers you help, so your teammates are going to notice if you're struggling as well, but if someone offers you help, you're not allowed to say no. You have to either like give up your pack or take a tow line or something like that. So that's a great rule, and it'll help alleviate a lot of arguments on race courses. And because usually when people are struggling, you know, they're a little bit not with it mentally, and understanding that they're actually slowing the team down. So that's a big one. Staying positive is huge. Just having a positive outlook, especially when things are going wrong. If someone starts to become negative on a team, they can kind of bring the whole team down. And that's like the death knell of like any team, is the negativity. Once it seeps in, and, you know, then they start blaming the event director or the course, or, you know, this is stupid, and then their race is over. Whereas you have a team that's, you know, maybe back of the pack, but they're getting along well, they're having fun, they have a positive outlook, they'll go on to finish the race for sure. Whereas those negative teams, they'll drop out at the next transition area. And we see that at Wilderness Traverse in a lot of the races. So that positive outlook is incredibly important. So as far as like highs and lows of teams I've raced with, no one likes to talk about the lows with teammates. But yeah, I mean, I've had some crazy teammate experiences where, you know, it comes back to the mental side, where, you know, they weren't mentally prepared to handle the race we were attempting, and it just the team basically blows up on the course and you end up dropping out. But yeah, then things like Eco Challenge Fiji happen, and you have a new team, you know, an underdog team, and we all come together and it works really well. And that's just like, that's kind of what you're seeking in this sport, is a team that works that well together and then achieves a result like that. So yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah. Were you expecting to finish where you did? Yeah, you did an absolute, like, it was just such a tremendous result.
I mean, it's funny. Ryan's so positive, and he's such a pro, and he expects to win all the time. So I'm sure Ryan thought we were going to win. But like, my experience is so deep in these races, and I know like the percentages. Like, I think in all my races, I probably only finished like 75% of them, and then like goes down further if you're looking at podium finishes or other things. So I mean, I was going into it with eyes wide open. I kind of thought maybe like a 10% chance of getting on the podium if everything went well. It was just such a risk with a new team. But yeah, it's kind of where my head was at going into the race. But yeah, everything worked. It was really cool.
And I know in teams that you all have rules, and I love your rules that you put in place ahead of time, but that there's a lead navigator, there might be someone who's a pack mule and carrying a lot of the extra weight. What were the rules for the team, and what is traditionally your role in racing?
Yeah, this is actually, you touched on something that's very important. They did a study at a university-based study at an old race called Primal Quest that was big in the US for a little bit. And it was on teamwork and team rules and things like that. And they actually found through this study the teams that knew what their roles were, and then who the backup for those roles were kind of going into the race, ended up faring much better than the teams that didn't have this determined before the race. So yeah, the typical roles are, you're going to have your navigator. Like you said, you're going to have your pack horse or your workhorse. You're going to have like your mama bear, someone who's kind of watching out for the team, making sure everyone's healthy. And then you're going to have like your motivator, someone who's making sure that, you're moving at a decent clip. Those are kind of the main roles. But it breaks down even further. Like, say you have a bike mechanical or any type of, gear malfunction, kind of who's going to jump in and fix that problem right away, kind of thing. So the rules are all predetermined before the race, for sure. They should be. And then we know kind of who's going to back that person up. So my role on the team, I've always been the navigator. So I'm kind of just focused on keeping the team going in the right direction. And that's basically what I'm responsible for. And then in this race, Scott was my backup for navigating. Obviously Ryan was our workhorse. And I'd say Scott was probably managing the mama bear role, where he was kind of making sure everyone was doing okay. But also the unique thing at Eco Challenge, we had a support crew, and that was Wayne Leake, and he was also performing that role, making sure we were all looked after when we came into the camps. But yeah, that was kind of the rules and how they played out in that event, and kind of how they jive for adventure racing.
So when you put all of these together and all your different roles and sort of the highs and lows, what would you say is your most memorable, or like a specific moment that you're most proud of in all of your adventure racing?
That's a funny one. I mean, the Eco Challenge result was quite memorable. That's probably one of the best results I've also had. So that was pretty cool. But the other memorable things in expedition races are the races that don't go well, and the things that you learn from those really tough races. And I can remember numerous situations where, we've been struggling in races. There was the world champs in Spain was an example. It was just like a brutal race for me from a navigation standpoint. We just seemed to make wrong turns all over the place, and I couldn't make reason for why it was happening. But my team stuck by me, and we ended up finishing not great. I think we were like 15th or somewhere around there, but getting through a race like that feels almost as good as doing really well at a race. We had another race, the World Championships in Tasmania, where I was racing with Jack Van Dorp was on the team, and on about the third day, he was really starting to struggle with a tight IT band and just really severe pain down the side of his leg and in his knee. And we basically had decided on multiple occasions to drop out of the race. And it just happened that we were in remote location. We had to stop and sleep. We would get up and we'd kind of convince him, or not really convince him. He was kind of willing to go. He was like, okay, yeah, I can try another leg kind of thing. And this went on for like 3 more days, and finishing that race again, it was like, 12th, 13th, 14th. But getting across the finish line after enduring like some serious hardship and watching someone suffer like you've never seen someone suffer before, leave just as indelible memories as the good results. So yeah, it's a crazy sport. You have to be
It
willing
is
to
crazy.
fail. Failure is a part of it, and learning from your mistakes. That's huge with expedition racing, and that's again, I was lucky when I started out. There was a lot of races around Ontario, and I failed so many times. But when you fail and you learn from the mistakes, the lessons sink in so much better than if everything goes well, right? So
Absolutely. It is a memorable sport. And I know that, adventure racers, I once saw a blog post of places adventure racers sleep, because when you need to sleep, you're tired enough that you can drop anywhere. So I'd like to ask you, what is one of the strangest things you've eaten during a race? And what is one of the strangest places that you've slept during a race?
oh my gosh, you're right on the sleeping front. Like any gravel road, ditch, whatever is fair game. Yeah, depending on the location of the race, like you're looking for some cover at least from the elements. So countless little huts or like shacks or sheds that we would have found just in the middle of nowhere for sleeping. In the race in BC, we found like a little cave on the side of a mountain that had like a rock overhang. That was a kind of a fun place to sleep because it was really miserable. It was like sleeting outside, and we actually found somewhere dry, which was a miracle in that race. So, yeah, anywhere goes for as far as sleeping goes. And as far as eating, that's a tricky one. It's so tempting to eat some of the local food in some of the races, but it'll also bite you in the butt if you're not careful. So like Fiji was a good example. Some of the neat food we had there, they had their local potato. I forget what it was called, but you would, be handed these things at going through the villages, and that was fair game. So it was kind of fun to eat that kind of carbohydrate just to change up the diet. But yeah, really, it's risky if you're going to eat too much exotic variety. So we try and steer clear of that stuff.
Powdered baby food only. So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about your race. So you have competed all around the world at these, world like level competitions. So you're an incredible athlete, but it's so incredible to see how you give back to the sport and start, building up the skill set for the people in our area. So I'd love to hear about Wilderness Traverse and the work that you're doing there and some of the plans that you have for it going forward.
Yeah. That's you hit it on the head. That's the goal with Wilderness Traverse. And I'm actually taking over. Sean Roper was like a great event director for like 20 years in Ontario with his Storm the Trent adventure race, but he's unfortunately hanging up the shoes on that event. So I'm going to take that one over, which is a more entry level event next year. But yeah, I mean, I was lucky when I came to the sport. There were, like 3 or 4 series happening. You could race every weekend almost, and we've lost that. And I understand the reason. It's a lot of work. It's incredibly hard to put these things together. But again, it would be a huge loss not to have the community, something that I've enjoyed for so many years. So that's the goal now, is to give back, and that's kind of what I'm looking forward to, is kind of like bringing up the next generation of racers and seeing some of these new teams that have come to the sport through the Amazon show, and then maybe seeing them tackle an expedition race. It's super cool. We've seen it with some teams that have been racing for years that have come up, but now these new teams I'm really keen to see. So yeah, and that's the goal. It's to provide an experience in Ontario. Now, Ontario has like amazing adventure racing terrain. The lakes and the wilderness, the backcountry that we have is second to none as far as adventure racing goes. And I really credit the terrain in Ontario with my ability to learn to navigate, because we're usually working with kind of outdated small scale maps. 1 to 50,000 maps is the standard here, and there's not a lot of detail on the maps. There's more kind of things in the terrain that you're going to run into. So, and then the elevation isn't huge. There's hills out there. There's a lot of small hills, but nothing big. So if you can learn to navigate, I almost liken navigating in Ontario forest to like navigating in the fog. You can't really see much out of the forest all the time. So you're following compass bearings. You're really paying attention to the subtle differences in the relief and the hills around you and trying to figure out where you are on the map. But I really do credit learning to navigate here with, that transferring over into racing on the world level, where, I'll go to almost anywhere, any environment in the world, and I find the navigation is not as hard as it is around here. So that's not saying that we try and make the navigation super hard around here. It's actually kind of the opposite. We want the teams to finish the race and to have that experience. But there's definitely some little tricks you need to learn to get through the courses. So, but yeah, with the course design and the events, we're just trying to create a fun experience for a team to have over a weekend, and have them, thinking about that for the rest of the year. And then hopefully for some, they're going to use those skills and then progress to the next level and do a longer race.
So obviously you have some big plans for your races coming up next year that you'll be directing. Do you have some specific goals and plans for yourself athletically? Will you be returning to some racing coming up, or what does your 2023 kind of goals and plans look like?
I actually, right now, I don't have any plans for racing. Our team was discussing the World Champs. Looks like it's going to be amazing next year in South Africa. There's some really experienced event directors going to be hosting, and it looks like it's going to be probably the largest field ever in expedition adventure racing. So it's pretty tempting. My problem is it comes right on the end of my event directing season, and I can't put myself through that stress again. So I don't have any plans for any big races. We keep ourselves busy with a lot of local challenges. We're going to probably go and run the La Cloche Trail, the loop around Killarney Provincial Park. It's like a classic, really hard endurance run. It's 80 kilometers, which, it's not terrible from an ultra distance perspective, but it's like one of the most technical trails you'll find anywhere in the world. It's just relentless. So I often tell people if they can kind of hike around that trail in 24 hours or less, they're more than capable of finishing Wilderness Traverse or some of these other events. So that's kind of like a spring classic thing that we like to train for, my wife and I, and some other friends. But really just adventures like that are kind of what I have on tap. So no big racing plans yet. I think maybe once our kids get a bit older and we're in a bit better place as far as time management goes, I might look at doing more international racing again.
Amazing. So we have a couple questions we like to kind of finish off with to ask all of our guests. So first one kind of comes up. This is called the Endurance Icons podcast. So obviously these guests have got to a very high level in their sport, and that takes some serious skills and characteristics to be able to get to that level. So if we were to ask you, what is Bob Miller's secret weapon?
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about it a lot. I think it's the mental side. Just for whatever reason, I've never, like, the giving up part of me just won't do it. And this sport's made me realize that's a secret weapon that I have. I never really maybe realized it when I was younger playing hockey or other sports, but I was always that like dogged, determined kid. I wasn't the biggest kid, but I didn't care. I'd go and try and hammer it out. But yeah, it was perfect for this sport. So that mental side of never giving up and just always wanting to grind and get it done is probably the secret weapon for adventure racing for sure.
And if you had any advice for a new athlete, someone who's been considering adventure racing and, looking up your races, and with, Storm the Trent getting added to your roster, what's your advice to either brand new or aspiring adventure racers?
Yeah, I mean, you just got to jump in. That's the key right there is, sign up for one of the challenges and then kind of all the cards will fall into place after you sign up because then you got to kind of make it happen. But yeah, and you've got to just get some experience. There's actually books written on this now. There's a lot of material you can find online for how to train and prepare for the events. But yeah, you just got to jump in. And if you're still hesitant, come out and volunteer. We're always looking for volunteers, and that'll give you a better idea of what's involved. The sport can seem intimidating for sure, but I think once you attend one of the races, it really will open your eyes, and you'll see that it's just normal people out having fun on the weekend and enjoying the outdoors.
I love it. Who is your endurance icon, Bob?
It's probably the early, like the people that I've looked up to most are like the early expedition racers, kind of when I was coming into the sport and they were winning the events. So like Eco Internet was a big team back then for North America with like Ian Adamson, John Howard, Robert Nagel, those kind of guys, Robin Benincasa. It was cool watching them succeed and doing what I thought were these superhuman things. So those early racers. Mike Closer is also someone I looked up to. He actually was at Eco Challenge Fiji as well, still racing in his 50s. But just like his drive and determination to win races. When I was competing against him, I would see it on the course, and I was just like, yeah, this guy, that drive is there. If we could emulate that, it'd be awesome. So those are probably the people I most looked up to.
Well, it's incredible that your endurance icons sort of mimic the same superpower that you have, which is that just not giving up. And I think, in adventure racing, if there's any skill set you need to have, it's going to get very, very, very tough. So it's not a surprise that you've had the success that you have. But thank you so much for joining us today. This was so great to learn a little bit more about adventure racing and all the great things that you've been up to.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me, guys.
Of course. And if anyone's listening wants to learn a little bit more about adventure racing or we've piqued your interest, definitely check up the Amazon Prime.
World's Toughest Race.
Watch World's Toughest Race and check out Bob Miller's races. They're held in Ontario. I know I've personally done the Wilderness Traverse. It was one of my very first races that was, a 24-hour race. And it was... I would say it's been one of my absolute favorites, and it's just such a great team sport. You have so many traditions around that with, the Beaver Trophy, and it's it's just such a fun, incredible race that'll stretch you. So check it out, and if you have any questions, submit them, and we'll connect you to Bob. But thanks so much, and we'll be back next week.
Wow, how great was that? I always learn so much from these endurance icons. If you enjoyed the podcast as well, please consider liking us across social media, subscribing to us on YouTube, or giving us a 5-star rating on wherever you listen to your podcasts. We appreciate you and your support so much. We wish you happy training, and we'll see you back next week.